In this video, we're going to elaborate more on function notation and talk more specifically about zeros, intercepts, and domain and range. So, function notation can be used to talk about specific points in a table, list, mapping, or graph. First, let's talk about some vocab. So the y-intercept, this is a point where a graph crosses the x-axis. The y-intercept crosses the y-axis. So on a table or list, the y-intercept always has an x equal to 0, an input of 0. So for example, it's always 0 and then some y. So for the y-intercept, our x is always 0 when we look at our table, and when we look at our mapping, the x is always 0, and again it's going to look like something like this. When we look on a graph, it's going to be on the y-axis. So if we have a y-intercept, our x-intercept is the same, but it's now a point where a graph crosses the x-axis. The tricky part about the x-intercept, though, is it has 4 other names. We sometimes call it an x-intercept, a root, a solution, or where our f of x equals 0. Because this is also where y equals 0. This one now, for example, is x and then some 0. So again, where our y equals 0, so we have a point with a number and 0. And instead of being on the y-axis, now it's on the x-axis. So again, just to reiterate, the y-axis is a point on the y-axis. The x is always 0 for the y-intercept. The x-intercept, the y is always 0, and it's on the x-axis. So anytime you see the word intercept, that should be a big red flag of 0 is going to be one of my values. Right, let's go down below. Now it says, given the following mapping, find f of 0. Well, we can recall from previous units, this is really saying when your x is 0, what's your y? So I go to my table, when my x is 0, f of 0 equals 6. Because my x is 0, this I can call my y-intercept. So again, anytime you see 0 in the x or the y, that should be a big red flag of it's going to be an intercept. We just have to then decide which one. Because this one gave me a y value, it was my y. Okay, now they're saying below f of 5. This is really saying my x is 5, what's my y? So I go to my table, 6. So when my x is 5, my y is 6. Then it says, what is the x value where f of x equals 0? So now they're saying f of x equals 0. So now they're giving me the y is 0. And they want me to find my x. So I go to my f of x is 0, 7. So f of 7 equals 0. When my output is 7, when my output is 0, my input is 7. Because my y is 0, this is my x-intercept. So again, just to recall, the y-intercept, the x is 0. The x-intercept, the y is 0. Let's try another, but now when looking at ordered pairs. So find h of 0. This again is saying x equals 0. So I look here, -1. So h of 0 equals -1. And remember, these are the same thing. This is just an ordered pair. This is just function form. This tells us what function h we're using. Because my x is 0, this is my y-intercept. Now they're asking, what is the value of x? So we're looking for x when my h of x equals -5. So this is really saying your y is -5. What is your x? So where's my y, -5? Ooh, my x is -5. No, I want my y. So h of -4 equals -5. So when they give me a y value, I can say my x is -4. Good. When you're ready, flip the page. Let's try two more. One from a table, one from a graph. So now if we're looking at our table, these are our x values. These are our g of x, or also known as our y values. These are the same thing. This is just now function form. This is just our y value. So g of 2 is really saying when your x equals 2, what's your y? What's your y? So I go to where my x equals 2. So g of 2 equals 5. So when I have an x of 2, my y is 5. Okay, now same thing, but this is saying x equals 3. So I go to where my x equals 3. G of 3 equals 1. So in my function g, when my x is 3, my y is 1. And I can write this as an ordered pair as well. But notice the difference. Here they're giving me g of x. When they say g of x, they say g of 2, g of 3. Now in C, they're saying find x where g of x equals 13. So here they were giving me my x. Here they're asking for my x. So this time they're giving me the y value or the g of x, and we need to find the x. So this one I'm going to go to where g of x or my y equals 13, -2. So g of -2 equals 13. All right, moving to D. What does that word mean? What's a root? Well, if we go back to the last page, we need to remember that x-intercept has these names: 0, root, solution. So sometimes they're going to ask me, what's the 0 of this function? What's the root of this function? Or what's the x-intercept of this function? They all mean the same thing, and that's where our y equals 0. So anytime we see this, we need to think y equals 0. So if I now go back, I'm going to look and see where is my y equal to 0. We go to my g of x or my y. Boom. -1, 0 is my root, is my x-intercept. Now, the y-intercept we know is where our x equals 0. So, I'm looking for now where my x equals 0 and finding my y. So now we know this is our x-intercept, where my x is 0, this is our y-intercept. So notice the difference. They both have 0, but the x has a 0 in the y has a 0 in the x. So here my y-intercept is 0, -3. Last one, let's look at it now from a graph. So this is saying, what is the y value when x equals 2? Okay, I'm going to go to my graph. Where does x equal 2? Right here. So right here, when my x is 2, my y is -3. What is the output when the input is -1? So we need to recall output is y, input is x. So when my input is -1, so I go to -1. So here, -1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, -7. So but instead of saying x equals, input is, now they're saying f of 6. So we need to know this means x equals 6. So on my x, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. Right, f of 0, which hopefully we recognize, ooh, the x equals 0. This is our y-intercept. So I look where it crosses the y-axis, right about there, -6. Because when my x is 0, my y is -6. Last couple. Now when my x is -2. So we go to where my x is -2. Right about there, right in the middle. So that's going to be about -8.5. So we could leave it as function form if we'd like. Or if we wanted to write it as an ordered pair, we could also leave it like this. Either one would be okay. All right, last two. Now they're saying, what is a 0? We need to think x-intercept. So I look, where does it cross the x-axis? So this is my y-intercept. Right here is my x-intercept, where it's crossing the x-axis at 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4, 0 is my x-intercept. My y-intercept we know is 0, negative 6. So again, remember, they both have zeros. The y is in the x. For the x-intercept, the y is 0. So, in which question, did we answer, or did we find the y-intercept? D. We know it's 0, negative 6. Good. When you're ready, flip the page and try some of the practice problems on page 32 and 33. After you finish those, go to the end of the video and check your answers with the key.